Welcome to Alan Skorski Reports. I'm Alan Skorski. Fact 1. October 7th, 2023 saw the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Fact 2. Since October 7, 2023, the rise of anti-Semitism has been the highest and most violent since 1930s Germany. Fact 3. The record number of physical and violent attacks against Jews in America, Canada, Australia, and Europe has been largely coordinated at the highest levels of Islamist, jihadist, and Marxist organizations promoted by Hamas and their allies in Iran, Qatar, China, and Russia. Today's guest, who recently returned from Israel, is Canadian attorney, columnist, and best-selling author Warren Kinsella, whose recent book, The Hidden Hand, The Information War and the Rise of Anti-Semitic Propaganda, addresses these issues and many more. Counselor, it's an honor to have you.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Pleasure. So, to begin with, you wrote because in your book that you have been a campaign and a political activist for many years. You worked in many war rooms, and what you saw with the following October 7th, the activism that came so we thought sporadically and so organically was really highly coordinated. And because of your experience in political campaigns, you said this has all the makings of a campaign. So if you would, can you tell me, was there a specific rally event, because they were happening all over the world? Was there one specific thing that happened and we said, oh my God, this is not just some type of protest against Israel, but this is a coordinated campaign and we ain't seen nothing yet?
It wasn't one event per se, it was a number of them, and it was the timing. So there was the terrible events of that day, which you've just spoken about. And, Israel did not commence its ground incursion into Gaza, as you know, until 3 weeks later. So before Israel had had the opportunity to organize itself to have some kind of response, which in my opinion was proper and the right response, um, there were 2,500 protests around the world. And so somebody hears that and say, well, so what? There's lots of protests all the time. But what was noteworthy about these protests was the sameness of them. So you had people in different languages using the same chants and slogans. You had professionally rendered signs. You had them acting in a way, it was almost with military precision. And there was money. For example, some of the toolkits, so-called toolkits that they were issuing almost immediately, like Students for Justice in Palestine.
Right.
If you get arrested, here's who you call for legal representation, and we will cover the costs. And as you and I both know, lawyers aren't usually free. So right from the outset, again, before Israel had done anything, there was a degree of organization and money and coherence that you just don't see in an organic, spontaneous, response to some event. It was a coordinated campaign. I spoke to, the one thing I learned in law school is always ask yourself the question, what if I'm wrong? And I spoke to other political people
Right.
with experience in Canada and the United States, and everybody said the same thing. Yes, absolutely. This is a campaign.
So in the beginning of your book, and this to me sets the tone for the entire book, was about Gary Wexler meeting Amir Makul. And before I get to that, I'm going to tell you a funny story. Um, I went to college in Detroit, Wayne State University, 20 minutes from Dearborn. And again, back then, political activism was very different than it is now. But there was a speaker there, and he said to his audience, within 100 years, there won't be an Israel left. And I thought to myself, that's a very gutsy prediction to make. What in 100 years, none of us are going to be here to say that you were wrong or that you've got egg all over your face. However, in your telling in the book, Gary Wexler, who worked for the Ford Foundation, he was working, I guess, with the group to give grants to different organizations that they want to help Jews and Arabs in Israel. And here is what you write in the book, that he met Amir Makul, an Arab NGO living in Haifa. He said that when they met, Makul told him, just like you Jews came to organize Zionist events on campus, We will start to have our own people on campuses. We will start organizing our events, he continued, basically vowing that they would do everything the Jews did, only better and more effective. And wow, did they do it? And to me, that again, that's everything. That's where the book really begins. That this was all planned long, long time ago. October 7th was irrelevant. Nothing in between was relevant. This was the long game for them, which began a long time ago, which is why people like Yasser Arafat always rejected a two-state solution, because he knew that time was on his side.
Absolutely. Time is has been on their side.
Right.
And it is quite true. You cannot generate a well-organized global campaign against Israel and against Jews and against Western democracy overnight. And while we started to see the manifestations of it in that period between October 7th and the 3 weeks that followed,
Right.
as Gary Wexler told me for the book, and as my research showed, this had been in the works for some time. The great irony, the terrible irony, is they paid attention to what Israelis and the Jewish diaspora were doing.
Yep.
They started organizing birthright trips for themselves, their own foundations, creating their own media organizations or infiltrating media organizations in a malevolent way. Like they paid attention to what had been done in the past on the other side, on our side of the argument, and they created this monster that we are now seeing online and in our streets around Western democracy. And as evil and as malevolent as it is, Alan, like it has been an exceedingly effective campaign.
Right. So you also mentioned that Hamas targeted college students because they know that they're they're susceptible, they're easy to manipulate, and we saw it here with these videographers. They would go around to these different rallies and they would ask some college students, "When you say from the river to the sea, which river and what sea?" They didn't know anything. Said, "I don't know." So there's an example of people who just get in with what seems to be chic. So that's okay for college students to be dopey. But when you have politicians, the media, elected officials, they don't have that excuse. And I'll go a step further. This is now seeping into much higher levels of professions. I read how in Canada, a lot of doctors are leaving the country because of anti-Semitism in the medical profession. Last week, I interviewed a doctor who testified before Congress how his union has now been taken over by sympathizers of Hamas and Hezbollah, passing all kinds of resolutions, including supporting the BDS and calling for the halt of deportations of people like Mahmoud Khalil, who was the Columbia student who the Trump administration wants to deport because he came here and falsified his papers. So it's gotten much deeper than just the dopey college student who doesn't even know how they're wasting their parents' money.
Correct. But the reason why, I spend so much time in the hidden hand focusing on young people is, the numbers. The numbers are significant. So in that 3 week period after the 7th, a poll came out from the Harris Harvard people. And the Harris pollster, as you know, is one of the most reputable pollsters in the world. And they had an extraordinary figure saying, 70% of young Americans were sympathizing with Hamas more than Israel. And
Right.
what was noteworthy about that for me, because I've been writing about anti-Semitism and bigotry for about 40 years. Like the ADL, for example, has done polling on racism and anti-Semitism for about 60 years. And it's excellent work. And what they've always found is that if someone is concerned about racism, they were also concerned about anti-Semitism. But around the time of the pandemic, young people started to go like that. So they became less concerned about anti-Semitism. They started believing in conspiracy theories. That COVID was created by Jews.
Right.
The Jews run the pharmaceutical industry so they can profit from COVID. Like terrible, awful
Right.
things like that. And the bad guys were waiting for them. Iran, aided and abetted by China and Russia and Qatar and so on. And they launched a very successful campaign because, we all know COVID was one of the most significant events of our lifetimes, right? It
Right.
was a cultural, economic, political revolution. And all these young people, they lost out on what guys like you and me got to experience, proms and commencement
Right.
exercises and so on, and travel. And so the bad guys very effectively targeted them and got a tremendous degree of success in getting people, these young people, particularly Gen Z, so about 18 to the age of 24, onto their side. So if you go to their protests, as I've done, Alan, and I'm a big guy, so I'll wade right into the protest and, I'll see some kid and I'll say, that sign you're holding up, that's anti-Semitic. Like that's grossly anti-Semitic. And these kids will say, well, oh no, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm anti-racist. So the objective of this campaign that has been overseen principally by Iran is to depict Israel as a fascist, white supremacist, white colonialist, apartheid state like
Right.
South Africa. And they've been very successful at that with young people. So that to me is where the biggest problem is. If you look at the polling in Canada, the United States, and Europe, most older people believe Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel has a right to exist within safe and secure borders. But young people no longer believe that. And I believe that they've been manipulated by this campaign.
Right. So you mentioned COVID, and I remember early on there were news reports that in Israel they think that they were close to some type of pill or a pharmaceutical that would cure it, and immediately came out, well, of course, because they're the ones who caused it. And I remember seeing that very early on. So you
Yes.
mentioned also something else that's very interesting about the propaganda and how easily manipulative people are, or manipulatable. That's the right word for it. Um, when the massacre was going on October 7th, you remember there were the young Hamas terrorists calling their parents saying, "I just killed a Jew with my bare hand," and the parents expressing joy, "We're so proud of you." And also shortly afterwards, you had Hamas spokesman, don't remember his name, saying that they'll have October 7th and they'll do it again and again and again and again. They were bragging about it. You had imams in America praising it. But then shortly after, they switched the campaign saying that Israel committed October 7th so they could have a justification to go invade Gaza. So I'm thinking this is beyond just hating people who are susceptible. People have just lost their blanking minds. On the one hand, they bragged about it, and then they're saying, no, Israel did it to themselves to do this, and Netanyahu wants to distract from his campaign. So it just, again, it's gone beyond what you would think is, like, again, a campaign strategy or how to target a certain group. People have come to believe what they want to believe to fit their own agenda and narrative.
You and I believe in decency. We believe in democracy. We believe in civilization. And for us, what we all saw immediately after the commencement of the atrocities on October 7th made no sense. On the one hand, you had Hamas live streaming on social media platforms their atrocities. So, and horrible things that animals don't do to each other.
Right.
And then you had other images where they were pretending to be concerned about the welfare of Israeli children or hostages and so on. And it was this binary communication strategy that was contradictory. And what I talk about in The Hidden Hand is it actually wasn't. The horrible stuff was directed at the audience that they wanted to radicalize, principally young Muslim men in the Muslim
Right.
Ummah around the world, who they wanted to bring into the fold and further radicalize. And this other image is, as you pointed out, to deny, the terrible acts of sexual violence against Israeli women and girls,
Right.
the 1,200 men, women, children, and babies killed, like the hundreds and hundreds who were grievously wounded on that day. So they had this binary strategy that to those of us in the West makes no sense, but it worked. So they were able to radicalize and bring in people who subscribed to their extremist homicidal philosophy, but they were also able to, with these dopes, these young dopes that you mentioned, throughout the West, principally on university campuses, to believe that Hamas was a liberating force, that Hamas was not a terrorist force. It was extraordinary. It's pretty hard to run a campaign at the best of times. To run a campaign with two
Right.
contradictory messages and make it successful, that's something that hasn't happened many times in human history.
Right. So here in America, again, the big university campuses that had the most anti-Semitism, we had Columbia, NYU, Harvard, Yale. In Canada, you had University of Toronto, McGill, Concordia. And then you've got elected officials. I still remember Stephen Harper. I was in Israel when he was there visiting, and he was a great friend of Israel and the Jewish people. And then you got Justin Trudeau, not as much, and Mark Carney to me has just been a disaster. And then I see the mayor of Toronto, Olivia Chow. Now, here in the U.S., in New York, the Jewish capital of America, New York, we got Zoran Mamdani. Next door in New Jersey, we've got another guy who's going to run for Congress. I think his name is Hamawi. He's a doctor, very big Hezbollah Hamas supporter. In Michigan, Al Sayed. So it's happening all across this country where there's just a much grander movement. And in the past, when you and I were younger, we always believed that there was a pendulum. First, it'll go to the right, go to the left, and things will swing back and forth. The way I look at it now, I see no pendulum. I think that we are definitely screwed. Again, it'll be the Jews first, but then I think the rest of decent society in the West, unless they become active and protect themselves, they're next because Hamas isn't just targeting us. They're
No,
coming after us
absolutely.
first. But,
Absolutely.
Western democracy, Christians, you look at again. Well, go ahead and respond to that, and then I'll
Well, you're right. Yes, absolutely. The old cliche is true. They start with the Saturday people and they come for the Sunday people. So if you go into these protests, as I've done, you will see signs attacking Israel, attacking Jews, but also attacking Western democracy
right,
and the pillars of our way of life. So that is true. But getting back to your point about these politicians, it's very important. So you look at a guy like Mondami in New York, like why would they be so preoccupied with the mayor of a city, admittedly,
right,
one of the biggest cities in the world? Because you're a Michigan guy, as you mentioned a minute ago, and what happened in your home state is really important. So in Dearborn, you have people who openly communicate Hamas's message throughout the state and throughout the United States.
right,
And what's interesting, and I talk about this in The Hidden Hand, the bad guys know that city councils, like in Dearborn, don't set foreign policy. That's done by the
right.
State Department. That's done in Washington. But they know if they have enough building blocks, if they have enough success at the local level, at the municipal level, it seeps up to the state level and then up to the federal level so that ultimately they can control foreign policy. And look what's happening tonight as you and I speak. Tonight, you've got the President of the United States using foul language and, I'm no fan of Bibi, but he does not deserve to be talked to and treated in the way that he's being treated by the President of the United States. And, that could be a coincidence, but to me, I see the hidden hand where the objective always has been to isolate and delegitimize and ultimately wipe out the Jewish state. And tonight, to me, it feels like they're closer to that goal.
Okay, so that's a big debate going on in Jewish circles tonight on social media. I'm seeing that all over the place. I'm kind of like, let's wait and let everything, come out because sometimes a lot of this stuff is for show. Um, Something else in your book that I liked also is that you highlighted the Jewish leftists. Because you mentioned that you're not Jewish, and I'm like, so what? I mean, it's a known fact that our best friends are not Jewish and our worst enemies are Jewish. People like you, people like Douglas Murray, Colonel Richard Kemp, and the list goes on. And then our worst enemies are, as you mentioned in the book, Jewish Voice for Peace. And then there's Peter Beinart and Ben the Ark and all these other groups. And I think they've hurt us more than anything else. They didn't need the Hamas campaign. They have their own inbred their own loyalty to this Marxist ideology that is very anti-Israel, and they have made it kosher to bash Israel. And to me, they're the ones guilty of putting a bullseye on the back of every Jew.
I couldn't agree more. And like, I'm not a shrink. I can't figure out the psychology of people, of what would persuade them to advocate against themselves,
Right,
to advocate against their own existence and their own essence. That to me is crazy beyond belief. But the bad guys have done it. And now it's just a minority. It's not an army of Jews who have joined the bad guys. But what they've very successfully done is take them and put them in the front, put them in the window
yeah,
so that they can respond to the principal correct allegation against them, which is you're anti-Semitic. You are the new Nazis. You
right,
people are the new Nazis. And they say, no, 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 just over here, look here, I've got, a Jewish friend, or I've got independent Jewish voices, or whatever. And they do that in order to rebut this allegation that is correct, that is right and proper. And that's pretty sophisticated messaging,
yeah,
right?
and
And
well,
it's
yeah.
and it's worked for them.
And you mentioned also Neturei Karta, and they're number one because they dress very Hasidic. Jewish Voice for Peace, you never know if they're Jewish or not. With Neturei Karta, and they're the most vicious. They're the ones who compare Israel to the Nazis, and they're not motivated by a left-wing ideology. They're motivated by a very perverted interpretation of the Torah that Israel can't come into being until the Messiah comes. And
And
even their
money, and they are motivated by money. It's been proven that they have received, their leadership has received money from Iran.
so
And
yeah,
but they, as you say, visuals, you
yep,
and I are in a visual medium right now. Visuals are very important.
right,
And you can say a lot more with an image than you can with words. So how those Hasidic looking men
right.
look has been critically important to communicating this campaign to say, well, we're not anti-Semitic. Look who
Right.
we with us.
Yeah, listen, and we see their videos all the time where they say, "Look at us." Again, I'm referring to near Ture Karta. We have Christian friends and Muslim friends, and I say, I got news for you. First of all, there are no Muslims living in your neighborhood. There are no mosques in your neighborhood. You've got nothing to do with any of them except for the photo op right now. And I remember years ago when Ahmadinejad was here from Iran and they had a meeting with them. Now, Ahmadinejad is not just anti-Israel. He was a Holocaust denier.
Exactly.
And yet they sat and they had a meeting with them, praise him as a great man. Um, so now again in America, again, I mentioned this earlier, I alluded to it, why we're in such big trouble because it used to be you had Republicans, Democrats, then you had like a fringe party like the Green Party, and they would be like the party that had the anti-Semites. Today, the Democrats have been hijacked by that party. You're seeing it all across, so much so where they've got this candidate now in Maine who had a Nazi tattoo, but he is, an avowed communist. So, and this got nothing to do with Netanyahu because, again, what's the big lie? I'm not anti Semitic, I'm only anti Zionist. I'm not
Yeah,
anti Israel, I'm just anti Netanyahu. Well, I remind everybody that Netanyahu, while he may be the longest serving prime minister of any democracy, from the time that Oslo was signed until, his long stint, you had Ehud Barak, you had, Rabin, Shimon Peres, Ehud Barak, Ehud Olmert. Even Ariel Sharon, who was a long time, military hawk, gave all of Gaza back. So there was plenty of time for the so-called people who want peace and justice to have what they wanted from Israel if their only objective was to get their own state, their own country. Which means that Netanyahu is just, he's an easy whipping boy, but he's got nothing to do with the problem.
no, the problem is, the point I always make to people is, because you raise an important point, is, being critical of Israel is not anti-Semitic. All the Jews I know, and I was in Israel, as you point out, just about a week ago, they can take it. They're Democrats. They believe in democracy. They
Right,
believe in free speech. They can take it. Unlike, Hamas, where if you dissent from the prevailing view in
right,
Gaza, you're going to get killed. So it's acceptable to be critical of the government of Israel as there is, be critical of the government of Canada or the United States,
right,
whatever. But it is anti-Semitic to blame individual Jews for the decisions of the government of Israel or to blame individual Jews for some grand conspiracy. And that's the problem. That's what I talk about in The Hidden Hand is this is an anti-Semitic
Right.
campaign. This is not about politics or public policy.
Right.
This is an anti-Semitic campaign directed at individual Jews to make them feel isolated and afraid and anxious, and to drive them out of Canada or the United States and Europe, and to send them God knows where.
So I want to also address briefly the definition of criticism, and this brings me to people like Tucker Carlson, for example. Okay, I can be critical of Israel. I think it costs too much to live there. They have socialized. There are things that I disagree with, but my criticism is not meant to delegitimize the state or the people. It's a
So,
criticism. You can improve here. I don't agree with that policy or this policy. But then there's what they call like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, who are both, Islamists in the U.S. Congress who say, no, you're not criticizing the government. You're accusing them of genocide. You're accusing them of apartheid. You're looking to delegitimize them. You're not being critical of them. So
and
that's one thing also I think is so important to, clarify what criticism actually means.
and one of the principal criticisms they've made over and over and over from the very first day,
Right.
again, before Israel had even begun its ground incursion into Gaza, is this allegation of genocide.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time, as you saw in the book, in The Hidden Hand, debunking that notion.
Right.
And there's no question, every Israeli you speak to who's fair-minded and decent will say, I deplore the loss of innocent Palestinian
Yep.
lives. But the principal killer of Palestinians is Hamas. They
Right.
kill their own people.
Right.
What they do is they're experts. Their one area of expertise is attacking Israeli civilians, attacking Jews,
Right.
killing them, inviting a powerful response,
Right.
and then publicizing the results. That's what they are really good at. And there has been no genocide. There has been no genocide. It's provable. I encourage everybody take a look at my book. And because the main source of information about this so-called genocide, as you know, is the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run from top to bottom in its entirety
Right.
by Hamas. So, all of these Western news organizations, from the New York Times to the Globe and Mail here in Canada to the Times of London, their source of information about casualties is
Right.
Hamas. And
Yep.
that is just absurd. That is ridiculous. And unfortunately, that problem has only grown since October 7th.
Right. And then also, you mentioned this in your book, the NGOs. So I know you mentioned Amnesty International, but to me, there's also, if you remember, Doctors Without Borders. Don't tell me that these doctors didn't know what was going on in the hospitals there. Don't tell me that these doctors didn't know that Hamas was hiding their weapons there. Don't tell me that these doctors didn't know that kidnapped Israelis that where they were being hidden. So they knew, but they're all part of it, in my opinion. I think they all have blood on their hands, whether it's UNRWA, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. They're all there on the ground, and they're all contributing, and they're all there to protect Hamas.
They're not fair-minded. They're
Right.
not fair. So any opportunity that they can get to criticize Israel, they take.
Right.
And any opportunity to defend Hamas, whether they're in UNRWA or one of these other NGOs, they take advantage of that too. Like, the best example, I spend a lot of time on it in the book, is the so-called bombing of the
Right.
Gaza hospital.
Yep.
Okay. So that took place on a critical day. That was the day that President Biden was
Right.
traveling to Israel to show solidarity with the people of Israel after the terrible events of October 7th. And as his plane was landing, it was masterful. This story went around the world, and including the New York Times, 500, hundreds killed at Gaza
Right.
hospital, but Israel did it, Palestinians say. And so, but the problem is this: the hospital's still standing. 500 people were not killed. It's possible that none were killed at all.
Right.
The missile hit the parking lot at the hospital, and it was Palestinian Islamic
Right.
Jihad that did it, not Israel. But around the world went this story that Israel had done it, and it was one of the most successful exercises in
Right.
propaganda, propaganda that was completely false from start to finish. Went around the world. And, as Biden said when he arrived, he said, hey, guys, I don't think Israel did this. I think the other team did it. And unfortunately, there's still people, Alan, in this world who believe that Israel bombed a hospital.
See,
They still do.
and I remember that because I remember that Israel said it wasn't us, but no one believed them, and then they provided the audio conversation between Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, where they acknowledged, they said, "Yeah, we're the ones who did it," but then Israel was forced to reveal one of their information gathering techniques that they can monitor everything that's going on there. So I remember that episode very well. I think Jonathan Conricos was the IDF spokesman at the time.
Yeah.
In your
Yeah.
book, you close out the 10 things that we can do to combat this. So some of it was, again, holding social media accountable. Good freaking luck with that.
Yeah.
There is stuff that's just so anti-Semitic, and I'll report it sometimes just to see what's going to happen. And I'll get a response saying it didn't violate our community standards. I'm like, okay, if this doesn't, then nothing will. But there are a few things though that you point out though that does work. I know that the Trump administration has tried it, and they're still doing it, where they threaten to cut funding for universities. They've done that, and they've managed to get policy changes. Deportations, it worked. I know that there was pushback in the courts and blah blah blah. And again, everything here is politics in America. It's the worst of humanity almost. Trump wants to do it, so Democrats don't want to do it. Free speech, it's not free speech. I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm only criticizing Israel. So I don't know that we're gonna be able to fight this. Maybe we can make a little bit of a dent, but we're so outnumbered. And I think you pointed this out also. I think in one of your interviews, there are maybe 2 billion Muslims in the world. Okay, let's say, and I'm going to say 50% are Islamist leaning. And I say only based on polls I've seen when it comes to the West Bank or other places where the overwhelming majority supported what they were doing to Israel. There are 15 million Jews. Half of us suck. Okay. So look at the numbers. We're so overwhelmed that we couldn't compete on our best day.
But let me make you feel better. Let me make you feel better about one thing.
Okay.
We've got a better story, right? Our side, we are telling the truth. We on our side is
Right.
democracy and civilization and decency. And anybody who's gone to Israel, you've got Jerusalem, I believe, behind you.
Yeah.
The thing that is most effective is for people, and I wish, I was a trillionaire like Musk, and I could take a whole bunch of these Gen Z
Right.
kids and put them on a plane and take them over to Israel and say, take a look at it yourself. And
Right.
you see that Israel is this diverse, pluralistic democracy in a sea of tyranny in the Middle East, where, there's black kids in the IDF and Muslims in the Knesset and the judiciary and women in positions of prominence throughout
Yep.
Israeli society. Like, it is not South Africa. It is not a dictatorship. It is not white supremacy. This is a democracy that is worth emulating, not eliminating. And so that to me is the thing that Israel, because I have some criticism of Israel's communication strategy in the book, as you
Who
know.
doesn't?
Israel needs to tell its own story
Yeah.
better because it's got an amazing story to tell. And I think if we get back to doing that, if Israel gets back to doing that, it'll help address some, not all, of the problem that we've currently got.
Well, there's an organization called Memory, right? Middle East Media Research Institute. They document verbatim what imams in America and around the world are saying about Jews, Christians in America. If we only put that out, even if you're not going to come over and love Israel, you're certainly going to be more suspicious of what the agenda of Hamas and the people are. But even with the truth on our side and the evidence out there, we're not using it. So something is just really wrong over there.
Well, in fairness to, I don't want to sound like I'm too critical of Israel because when I've been in Israel,
Yeah.
I'll say to people, Christ, you got a great story. I'm the Irish Catholic guy. I'm telling you, you've got to tell your
Right.
story and get it out there. I'm a campaign guy. And they'll say, and they're right, Warren, we've been kind of busy. Like we're fighting of wars on 7 different fronts.
Right.
Like it's just unrelenting. So that is true. But even during the Persian Gulf War, as I talk about in the book, General Schwarzkopf, as you and I are old enough
Right.
to remember, he'd come out every morning, say, here was the objective, here's
Correct.
what we achieved, here's where our objective is going to be next, without giving away
Yep.
too much to the enemy. Israel needs to do that.
Right. I agree.
And, technologically, Israel is the most advanced country in the world. All these young anti-Semites, when I see them, I say, "Oh yeah, that iPhone in your pocket, it was invented by an Israeli."
Right.
And the
Yeah.
Wix website you've got, that was invented by an Israeli.
Yeah.
So we need to tell the story of Israel better, and I think that would go a long way to address some of this anti-Semitism.
Warren Kinsella, you have a documentary now called The Campaign based on this book. Tell us more about it and how people like me can watch it.
Well, that's why I was in Israel. We were invited to show it. It got its world debut at the Doc Aviv, the Tel Aviv International Documentary Festival. It was well received. It's disturbing, Alan. It's got some images in there that are disturbing. But the
Right.
point we make is that there is a global, well-organized, well-funded campaign against Jews and the Jewish state and
Right.
Western democracy.
Right.
And we talked to everybody from Leon Panetta to Alon Levy, you name it. We talked to all kinds of experts, and it has some disturbing stuff in it, but it was very well received in Israel. I just showed it this week on Parliament Hill in Ottawa to members
Right.
of Parliament and senators. It was well received there. So we've just done a deal with a distribution company in LA who is going to start getting it seen by people across North America. We're meeting with somebody tomorrow about a worldwide deal to show it in other places in the world. So we're going to get it out there and people are going to start seeing it more starting in the fall.
God bless. So, but right now, if I want on YouTube, am I gonna see a trailer of it? Or is there anything to watch?
Yeah, there is a trailer. So what I'll do, I'll send it to you right
Yeah.
after our discussion,
Terrific.
so you can make use of it in what you put out there,
Terrific.
and it just gives people a sense of what it's all about.
Good. Warren Kinsella, best-selling author, activist, friend of the Jewish people, columnist, attorney. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us, and just continue doing what you're doing because we need people like you.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much for having me on, and look forward to talking again.
Thank you. So, in your book, I didn't bring it up. You mentioned also the Capital Research Group and Ryan Morrow.
Yeah, you
I
know this
I've
guy?
interviewed Ryan a couple of times.
He does get the report I had. It was
Yeah.
pretty good work.
Right. And then also, yeah, I stopped recording now. And then also, you mentioned, I was going to ask you about this in the interview. I forgot to about following the money.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I said, I wonder if he read the book Harpoon. And then three pages, I said, oh, I guess he did, because
yeah,
I know Shurat Hadin was involved with the Mossad
yeah. No,
in
I
that
talked to
operation.
a guy. I mean, I couldn't name the guy as you saw, but he was actually a little critical between us girls. He was a little critical of Harpoon, and I was surprised by that. I think his point was we should have gone further. We should have been more
Right.
hardcore, and I agree with that. Because the money we're talking about, I'm sure you've seen the work
Yeah.
that has been done by Charles Asher Small with ISGAP.
Yeah.
Like the money that went to Cornell, for example,
Yeah.
it's just bananas.
Yeah.
And then during the period, that 10-year period where they're getting those billions, anti-Semitism increased by 300%.
Right.
So it's there's a correlation between the money and anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
It is there. It's
Yeah.
provable. But I'll send you the trailer, and
Terrific.
maybe you can make use of it when you broadcast the
We're gonna
broadcast.
do that. I'm gonna add that to it also. And then I know also Israel News Talk Radio was very excited about this interview. So they're gonna promote it, and we've got a couple of other outfits that pick up my show, and they're gonna put it out there as well.
That's great stuff. If you need anything else, man, just let me know. But very grateful for the opportunity.
Pleasure, and we'll be in touch.
You got it. Thanks,
God
Al.
bless. Thank you. Bye.